As the astronauts of Apollo 11 headed to the moon, the women of NASA were blazing new trails on Earth.
I was the first programmer they hired. I came up with the term software engineering, and it was considered a joke. What? Software is engineering?
Before she died, the engineer who saved Apollo 11 finally revealed how close NASA came to losing everything and the disturbing discovery the agency was forced to hide. 3 minutes before the spacecraft touched the moon, something went terribly wrong deep inside the capsule. What happened in those final minutes was far more dangerous than NASA ever admitted, and the truth only came out decades later when the woman responsible for saving the mission chose to speak. The night NASA lost control, the alarms began without warning as the lunar module Eagle moved steadily toward the moon. Inside the small cabin, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were focused on landing. The ground was coming closer. Then the onboard computer flashed numbers that no one expected to see. The screen showed 1201, then 1202. The sounds cut through the cabin and through mission control like a blade. These alarms were not routine. They were marked in training as events that should never happen during a landing. They signaled that something deep inside the computer system was going wrong. The astronauts did not know what had failed. They only knew that the machine guiding them to the surface was under stress. In Houston, the flight control room went silent. Engineers stared at their screens. Controllers felt their hands go cold. The landing was only minutes away. There was almost no time left to think.
Houston, we have a problem. We have a main bus B undervolt.
They had to choose whether to abort the mission or press on. An abort would mean admitting failure in front of the entire world. It would mean decades of work wasted. It would also mean the risk that the Soviet Union could reach the moon first. At the same moment, far from Houston and far from the moon, Margaret Hamilton was watching the same data. She was one of the lead software engineers who helped build the Apollo guidance computer. She knew its limits better than almost anyone. When she saw the alarms, she felt shock and fear rise at once. She later said that her first thought was simple and terrifying. This had never happened before. Not in testing, not in simulations, not in any mission. She wondered why it was happening now, during Apollo 11, at the exact moment when everything was on the line. The computer was overloaded. It was being asked to do more work than it could handle at one time. Data from the radar was flooding in. Navigation calculations were stacking up. The system was falling behind. Under normal conditions, this kind of overload would cause a full crash. A crash would erase navigation data. Without navigation, the astronauts would lose their guidance. That loss could leave them unable to land or return safely. As engineers looked closer, they realized something even more frightening. The hardware had not failed. The computer was doing exactly what it had been told to do. A radar switch had been left in the wrong position. That small human error was sending extra data into the system and stealing precious computing power at the worst possible moment. The landing was seconds away from being canceled. Then something unexpected happened. The computer did not shut down. It did not freeze. Instead, it began to protect itself. It started rejecting tasks it could not afford to run. It dropped work that was not essential. It kept only the core functions needed to land the spacecraft safely. It focused on survival. The controllers did not continue the mission because they felt brave. They continued because they trusted the software. That trust came from years of arguments, warnings, and hard lessons. It came from a belief that the machine could handle failure without collapsing. That belief had been formed long before Apollo 11, inside a small lab at MIT, after a moment when a child pressed keys she should never have touched and revealed a truth that NASA had tried to ignore. The child who broke the moon mission. Years before Apollo 11, Margaret Hamilton brought her young daughter Lauren to work at the MIT lab. It was a quiet day. The room was filled with large computers that hummed steadily. Engineers were running a simulation of a lunar mission, testing how the guidance system would behave during flight.
How you read? Okay, read you, babe. You're looking good on the ground out of here.
To them, it was routine work, but to a child, it looked like a control room for space travel. Lauren sat at the console and pretended she was an astronaut. She touched the keyboard. She pressed a few keys without knowing what they meant or what they controlled. The system crashed. In an instant, the simulation collapsed. Navigation data disappeared. The virtual spacecraft lost its position and direction. On the screens, the mission was gone. The astronauts were lost in space.
Houston, be aware, I moved from the command module.
Some people in the room thought it was a harmless accident. It could be reset. No real spacecraft was at risk. But Hamilton felt something else. She felt fear. She later said that the thought hit her immediately and refused to leave. This could happen in a real mission. The problem was simple and deeply frightening. A program that was meant to run only before launch had been activated during a simulated flight. The computer did not fail. It followed instructions perfectly. It erased navigation data because it was told to do so. The machine had no way to know that the timing was wrong. If this happened in space, the result would be far worse than a failed landing. Without navigation data, the crew would lose their ability to know where they were or where they were going. They could drift endlessly, unable to return home. Hamilton took this discovery seriously. She went to her managers and explained what had happened. She asked to add protections to the software. She wanted a code that could prevent this mistake, even if a human pressed the wrong button. The answer she received was clear and cold. No, they said the software was already complex. They said astronauts were highly trained and would never make that kind of error. Then Apollo 8 went to the moon and everything changed. While orbiting the lunar surface, astronaut Jim Lovell spoke words that froze mission control. He said he thought he had done something wrong. He had pressed the wrong button. The same program was activated. The same danger appeared. Confusion spread through the control room. They rebuilt navigation data step by step. They sent it back to the spacecraft. Apollo 8 survived, but only barely. After that, the arguments ended. Hamilton was finally allowed to strengthen the system. She added layers of protection that could catch mistakes before they caused disaster. She built logic that could interrupt astronauts, shut down unsafe actions, and raise alarms when the system was in danger. What NASA learned was unsettling. Space was dangerous, but it was predictable. Humans were not. The greatest threat to the mission was not the moon. It was human error meeting software that could not protect itself. And when Apollo 11 began its descent, that lesson would decide whether the crew lived or died. The code that chose who lived or died. In the 1960s, computers were rigid machines. They followed instructions exactly as written and in the exact order given, and they could only do one task at a time. They did not pause to ask questions. They did not adjust to surprise. When something unexpected happened, they simply stopped working. Failure was immediate and complete. Margaret Hamilton refused to accept that kind of weakness.
But of course, it ended up being more jobs were created with the computers than there were with the Marchant machines.
She understood that spaceflight was full of the unexpected. Astronauts could press the wrong button. Sensors could send bad data. Systems could overload at the worst possible moment. A computer that simply gave up under pressure was not acceptable. Lives depended on it. Hamilton set out to build software that could think about importance. Her system could decide which tasks mattered most and which could be ignored when time and power were running out. Today, this approach is common and well understood, but at the time it was almost unheard of. It did not even have a clear name. What mattered was what it could do. Her software could interrupt itself.
Hamilton's group wrote the lunar lander's guidance software, and they had to plan for every contingency.
It could stop working on less important jobs and focus on the core task. It could survive overload without collapsing. Instead of crashing, it could recover and keep going. This was not just a clever technical idea. It was a system designed to decide who lived and who died. It assumed that humans would make mistakes and that machines had to be ready for that reality. During Apollo 11, when the alarms sounded inside Eagle, the computer did not freeze. It did not shut down. It followed the rules Hamilton had written. It discarded tasks that were not essential. It protected the guidance system. It kept the landing possible. There is a famous image of Hamilton standing beside stacks of printed code that rise nearly as high as her body. Every line mattered to her. Every safeguard was intentional. She fought for each one. In the beginning, she was not fully trusted. She was young. She was a woman. She was new to a field dominated by older men. Her warnings were often dismissed. But by the time Apollo 11 flew, she was the lead software designer. And when the alarms rang and the landing continued, NASA were finally forced to understand that survival now depended on software more than hardware or pilots. That realization frightened them more than anything they had expected to face on the lunar surface. The truth NASA never put in the press releases. After Apollo 11, NASA chose its words with care. In public briefings and official reports, the landing was described as smooth, controlled, and carefully planned.
Apollo 11, Houston, about a minute and a half to LOS. You're looking great. It's been a mighty fine day.
The alarms were acknowledged, but only lightly. They were described as minor issues, manageable problems, small technical quirks that had been handled without danger. But that was not how it felt inside the agency. Inside NASA, engineers knew exactly what had happened. They knew the lunar module had landed while the guidance computer was under extreme stress. They knew the alarms were not harmless signals. They were warnings that the system was overloaded and struggling to keep up. They knew the computer had been only seconds away from forcing an abort. They knew it had not been operating comfortably. The success of the landing carried a disturbing lesson. Humans could reach another world, but only if machines were allowed to take control when humans made mistakes or when conditions became chaotic. The computer had acted faster than any person could. It had protected the mission by ignoring commands that did not matter and preserving the ones that did. But in 1969, this was not a message NASA wanted to share. The space program had been built on the image of astronauts as heroes in full control. They were depicted as calm, skilled, and commanding every system with steady hands. Apollo 11 quietly revealed that this image was already outdated. Control was shifting away from human judgment and toward software logic.
Naming the discipline software engineering as a way of giving it legitimacy.
The computer had made decisions on its own. It had chosen which tasks to drop. It had chosen what was essential for survival. Senior leaders found this deeply unsettling. They understood the risk of public doubt. The Cold War was still shaping every decision. Confidence mattered. Fear could weaken support. If people understood how close the mission had come to failure, trust in the entire program could crack. Margaret Hamilton understood this silence as well. She knew why the story was kept clean and simple. She knew why the alarms were softened in public language. The truth was not convenient. It raised questions that no one was ready to answer. So the story presented to the world remained polished. The landing was a triumph. The system worked. History moved forward. Among engineers, however, Apollo 11 became something else. It became a warning. From that moment on, software was no longer treated as a secondary tool.
I'll go through some of the software projects that I have been involved in with others, what I think has and what has not changed.
It was no longer seen as a helper to hardware or pilots. It became a central authority. It was recognized as a system that could decide outcomes in seconds. It was respected for its power and feared for its failure. That shift did not happen loudly. It happened quietly, inside design meetings and technical reviews. It happened in new rules, new safeguards, and new levels of testing. It happened because one mission had come too close to disaster. Hamilton had forced that change, even if her name was not spoken publicly. She knew that the most important moment of Apollo 11 was not the first step onto the surface. It was not the words spoken to the world. It was the moment when alarms filled the cabin and the computer chose to keep going. That moment revealed the truth, and the clearest record of that moment was not found in speeches or headlines. It existed in a few sentences spoken under pressure, words captured on tape, words remembered most vividly by the woman who had written the code and watched it face its ultimate test. The moment Hamilton realized everything was on the line. Margaret Hamilton had spent years worrying about this exact scenario. She once said, "The thing I worried about a lot once I took over the manned mission was, what if there was an emergency that came up?" That fear guided every decision she made. She understood that astronauts could be overwhelmed. She understood that systems could behave in unexpected ways. She understood that humans under pressure might not react fast enough. She believed software had to be built for failure, not perfection. Her solution had been radical. She designed software that could interrupt astronauts, interrupt itself, and force priority displays onto the screen.
Margaret Hamilton defined new forms of software engineering and helped launch an industry that would forever change human history.
Instead of trying to do everything, the computer would decide what mattered most. It would sacrifice low-priority tasks to protect guidance and control. It would take charge when humans could not. She explained it clearly. "I realized I could come up with a solution. Have our software interrupt the astronaut displays and replace them with priority displays." At the time, this idea unsettled many people. Computers were not trusted to override human judgment. Hamilton insisted that safety demanded it. Now that solution was being tested in real time. A radar system was sending unnecessary data. The computer became overwhelmed. The alarms appeared, but the software responded exactly as designed. It ignored low-priority tasks. It protected guidance. It kept the landing alive. Mission Control realized what was happening just in time. The decision came through. Continue. When Eagle touched down, Hamilton felt something more powerful than celebration. My God, look what happened. We did it. It worked. It was exciting. But excitement was only part of it. Beneath it was deep relief. The worst fear she had carried for years had become real, and the system had survived it. She knew the truth NASA would never headline. The mission succeeded because the system assumed humans could fail. As the astronauts stood on the moon, Hamilton understood that Apollo 11 had proven something irreversible. Software was no longer a background tool. It had just taken control at the most critical moment in human exploration. And that realization would shape everything she did next. How Hamilton quietly changed human history. The moon landing did not feel like an ending to Margaret Hamilton. It felt like a warning that had been heard just in time. The danger had not come from space. It had come from hidden assumptions inside complex systems. Hamilton understood that what almost failed during Apollo 11 could easily fail again somewhere else, and this time, the cost might even be higher. So she continued leading software design with even more urgency. Over time, she began using a phrase that many people laughed at: software engineering.
Written by Hamilton and a team of software programmers at MIT's Instrumentation Lab, when many thought software.
At the time, software was still treated as an afterthought. It was something written after the hardware was finished. It was flexible, informal, and often undocumented. But Hamilton pushed back hard against that mindset. Apollo 11 had proven that lines of code could carry human lives. If engines and structures were engineering, then software had to be engineering too. Many resisted the idea. Some thought the phrase was pretentious. Others believed software was too soft and changeable to deserve the same respect as physical systems. But Hamilton did not back down. She argued that discipline was exactly what software needed. She insisted on rigorous testing, formal methods, and clear responsibility. She believed that lives depended on it, because she had seen how close Apollo 11 came to failure. Years later, she reflected on what Apollo had truly changed. We were involved as an integrated team: hardware, astronauts, mission control. Software became a system-wide solution. That belief reshaped how complex systems were built. Software was no longer isolated. It became part of the whole. Aviation adopted fault-tolerant systems inspired by Apollo. Medicine adopted real-time monitoring and recovery. Finance adopted priority processing and safeguards against overload.
When the computer became overloaded, the restarts were triggered. The restarts in the software.
Space exploration adopted the idea that failure had to be expected and managed, not denied. Hamilton founded her own company to continue this work. She focused on how large systems break under pressure and how to prevent small errors from turning into disasters. Her research centered on reliability, safety, and trust. She was not interested in flashy features. She was interested in what happened when everything went wrong. Her work was demanding, but it was deeply personal. She was also a mother. During the Apollo years, she often worked long nights while raising her daughter.
I would take my daughter to work on nights and weekends, and she would watch me testing out the software.
As decades passed, the world caught up to her ideas. Software engineering became a recognized discipline. Universities taught it. Industries depended on it. The principles she fought for became standard practice. Many people used systems shaped by her thinking without ever knowing her name. In 2017, that changed publicly. President Barack Obama awarded Hamilton the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He summarized her contribution with striking clarity. Our astronauts didn't have much time, but thankfully they had Margaret Hamilton.
Apollo 11's lunar lander alarms triggered. Our astronauts didn't have much time, but thankfully they had Margaret Hamilton.
The recognition was powerful, but Hamilton never treated Apollo 11 as a simple triumph. She remembered it as proof of something darker and more important. That success does not come from believing systems are perfect. It comes from assuming they never will be. Today, Margaret Hamilton is still alive. She lives quietly, far from the noise of fame. She continues to speak about responsibility and technology. She continues to warn about blind trust in automation without understanding. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.